Oh, he's not. There's Pete. Okay, if we could head this way, we'll get started here shortly. Thank you. Okay.
I'm smiling.
Me too.
Okay, I would like to call to order the November 10th meeting of the State Board of Education. Roll call, please.
Mr. Wilson.
Present.
Mr. Durham.
Present.
Dr. Ernest.
Here.
Dr. Freitas.
Here.
Mr. Gastineau.
Here.
Mr. Mapes.
Here.
Superintendent McCormick. Mr. Miller.
Here.
Ms. Moe. Here. Ms. Brenscheller.
Can you pull it over closer to me and then I'll stick my
Mr.
mic down
Watts.
there? Here. Thank you, sir. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you and welcome again. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Apologies, go.
I'm sorry. I would like to remove item B from the consent agenda and add it as an addition to the action items. I have concerns that I'd like
Okay,
to discuss.
absolute. Item B, text-to-speak accommodations.
Yes.
So item B from consent agenda will become, that's a motion. Can we have a second, please?
I couldn't hear. I'm
We're-
sorry.
She wants to move item B from consent agenda to just to action.
What do you want? You want a second?
Yes.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Go, so ordered. So we will now have consent item B will become new business B.
Move to approved.
And then we have a motion to approve as amended. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? So ordered. Statement of the chair. We have a couple of congratulations. Kristen, for one, was honored last week by Indiana's Historical Society at their Founders Day Award with the Caleb Mills Indiana History Teacher of the Year Award. So congratulations, Kristen. And also, our very own Dr. Byron Ernest became the chair of NASB. So congratulations,
Thank you.
sir. Absolutely. And I know, again, I sound like a broken record here, but I do want to give the IHSAA a shout out here, making sure that kids have the opportunity to compete, which is important. And we've gotten through, and if I mess this up, I'm going to blame it on Greg and Pat because I reviewed these this morning. Volleyball, soccer, cross country, girls golf, and boys tennis state championships, and we are currently in the regional of football. So kudos to the IHSA for working to make those things happen. I know that Paul takes that very personally. I'm glad he's making those things happen for kids because they're important. Any other board member comments?
B. Jed.
Yes, sir.
I also would echo Paul Knighty's leadership with the IHSA in helping high schools make decisions of how to properly have these activities for kids. I'd also like to bring attention to a great educator that we lost last week, Steve Gookins. Was the superintendent at Jacksonville, Delaware Community Schools, did some interims at Milan, Lawrenceburg, and Madison. He was a lobbyist for the IAPSS, and he also lobbied for CTE. Steve was my mentor. and taught me kids first, and all the decisions you make in education are about the kids, and had a great impact on many educators in Southeast Indiana as well as East Central Indiana, and may he rest in peace.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes, sir?
TJ. I would just like to, 2 weeks ago at NASB's annual conference, NASB honored our retired Speaker of the House, Brian Bosma, with their highest honor, the Policy Leader of the Year. And I just wanted to give an Indiana shout out to him for all of his work. I know he was a major champion and cheerleader of State Boards of Education work. And of course started back in those of us that are a little more experienced remember the days of the late H. Dean Evans, who was Superintendent of Public Instruction at the time, and he started with him as his policy advisor. That's where a lot of that passion came from, and so I just wanted to give a shout out to him on NASB's highest honor as well.
Awesome, thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, public comment. Brian?
We have 3 public comments, and they all pertain to now action item speak.
Would those that are giving public comment like to speak on when we get to the action item, or do you want to speak now? Will we hear them all when we get to action item B?
They are all marked for at the time.
At the time of the action? Okay, thank you. Moving on to consent agenda, we have Accreditation Commission for Schools, Western Association of Schools and Colleges, 2021 SBOE business meeting dates, and 2021-22 upgrade course titles and descriptions. On C, I would like to propose an amendment. We usually try to stay away from dead week. We have a meeting set for July 7th, and the one shutdown that coaches and stuff get is the week of July 4th. So if we could back that up to either July 14th or July 21st, and that would give a true week off to those folks that coach and do sports. So if, I have no preference if it's the 14th or the 21st, unless someone else does.
14th or the 20, what'd you say?
14th or the 21st?
As a football coach, I think the 14th would be wonderful.
Yeah,
Right.
and that way you actually do get a week's
Yeah,
vacation in the
yeah.
summer.
Awesome.
Is the 14th okay with everyone? So is there a motion to amend those dates?
So moved.
Approve those dates with the amendment of the 14th in July?
Second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Ms. Delosa,
Yes.
Mr. Durham,
Yes.
Mr. Ernest,
Aye.
Dr. Freitas,
Yes.
Mr. Gastineau,
Yes.
Mr. Bates,
Yes.
Superintendent McCormick,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Ms. Moat,
Yes.
Ms. Renscheller, Mr. Watts.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to new business action. A, HEA 1003 flexibility waiver, Triton School Corporation.
Good morning.
Morning.
So we have a 1003 waiver request from Triton School Corporation. They must have been paying attention to the last meeting, because at the last meeting, the board did grant flexibility, a flexibility request around flexibility within the 180 days. So Triton wants that same flexibility that the board granted last meeting, and so staff recommends that the board approve that. They are not asking for less than the 180, they just want flexibility in how to deliver that 180 during this school year.
Questions by board members? Seeing none, is there a motion? We have a motion
Second.
and a second. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Ms. Delosa,
Yes.
Mr. Durham,
Yes.
Mr. Ernest,
Yes.
Dr. Freitas,
Yes.
Mr. Gastineau,
Yes.
Mr. Bates,
Yes.
Superintendent McCormick,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Ms. Moat,
Yes.
Ms. Rensler? Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. New business action item B would be text-to-speech accommodations guidance.
Morning again, I'm back. So the accommodations guidance comes to us from a legislative committee, the accommodations task force that recommended that the board look at some things. One of those is the accommodations for screen reader or human reader at the lower grade levels. What we have here and what has been debated over several years is really trying to ensure that the guidance that we put out is prescriptive and that it strikes a balance such that the accommodations are narrowly tailored to the student. Because we know the research shows that if the student is receiving an accommodation that they don't need, that they are deprived of the opportunity to reach their full potential in reading proficiency in this case. We also know, though, that if a student is not receiving the accommodation that they should, that there's an equity issue there, obviously. And so we had Dr. Michelle Goff take a stab at this, and we feel like this is a very good balance for kids to allow the screen reader at lower grades on the reading comprehension portion of the test, but also ensuring that parents and schools and those case conference committees know exactly how this should work and how it should be very carefully tailored to the student. So we would recommend that the guidance be approved as it's written. And I have Dr. Goff here, who is available for questions, if there are any.
Brian, do we have, this is really a public comment also on this one, correct?
Yes.
So let's do those first and then we'll get into board member comments.
Ms. McKinney? From ICASE?
Good morning.
Good morning. Do I need to leave this up or can?
No. There you go.
A lot more clear if I can, since I'm distant. I want to thank you for everything that this group does to support Indiana students and for allowing me to speak, I know briefly today. I tend to go on, so it's good that you're timing me on this. My name is Dr. Angela McKinney. I'm a school psychologist. I've been a special education administrator of the Ripley, Ohio Dearborn Cooperative for years, so this was my first hearing about Steve Gookins kind of caught me off guard, so I appreciate hearing that, and he was a good man. I'm also the past president of the Indiana Association of School Psychologists and a graduate instructor in school psychology at ISU. I'm a consultant with the Indiana IEP Resource Center, and that's my main job. And recently, I was also a member of the state task force who was working on the accommodations and making sure that all kids get what they need. I likened this to a kid who needs glasses, and then suddenly on the day of the test, you say, but today you can't wear those glasses. And that's where it really hit home for me, of taking away something that a student might need. I appreciate you removing this from the consent agenda so that we can look at this more clearly, and also so that I can share some of the concerns about the current guidance, as well as where I don't think the need for the guidance is there, because we have a larger guidance document that's put out every year by the Office of State Assessment. So I'm here to voice for multiple members of the task force who were unable to be here, specifically on behalf of the ARC of Indiana and the Indiana Council of Administrators in Special Education, or ICASE. We shared concerns that both the content and the general tone of the guidance was not where we had hoped it would be. While I have specific reservations about the document, again, it's important to note that there is a larger document that all schools use. They pulled this document to help know what they can do, what they can't do, what decisions to make, and that guidance exists. It's just that suddenly it's wrong. And if we don't correct that guidance, having an additional piece of paper is going to cause some mass confusion out there in the schools. We know that when we have more than one thing, especially when those things are at odds with each other, that's when my office gets 100 calls a day saying, I have this and I have this, what do we do? So it makes more sense to us to correct the master guidance document that is out there. The document also the larger document, not this memo, notes that there is an Indiana Accessibility Advisory Group that was made up of quite a few different people from different backgrounds. And we would really advise that that group be consulted with these changes again, so that voices for students with disabilities, voices for students with accessibility concerns, limited English proficiency, all the things that this can affect are actually heard and represented. Guidance for the appropriate use of accommodations is important, and consistent and accurate guidance is the key. But as educators, we recognize that students are individuals. Students with disabilities often have complex needs, and the needs of the individual student with the same exact disability are often very different. So that case conference committee is the group who knows the student, who meets on the student regularly, who works with the student on a regular basis, and who includes the parents. And that decision should be left not to a number, not to a bunch of yes/no questions in columns, but to those individuals that know the student best. In reading through some of the guidance that's within this memo, it is clear that I can picture individual students that based on the memo, I would say no, but I know that that student needs this accommodation. And I want to tell you about a quick conversation I had with a teacher, a special ed teacher at an elementary school at Jacksonville Elementary, immediately following our task force meeting. And I said, good news, this is coming. I said, and remember, you're really talking about those students who can't decode the information to begin with, who have such fluency problems that by the end of reading their sentence, they don't remember what they've read, so of course they can't answer the comprehension questions. Your students with visual difficulties who are scanning the page and exhausted by the time that they read something that they can't comprehend. And she said to me, now granted, this is a small school corporation, she said, I can think of 2 students this would help so much. It wasn't, let's do it for everyone. It wasn't, let's add in all of our 3rd graders with learning disabilities. It was, I can think of 2 students that this is appropriate for. Teachers are going to make good decisions because they know their kids. Let me know if I'm getting close on time.
No, you're fine.
It's critical that all students with disabilities are provided with appropriate accommodations as determined by the case conference on those individual tests and on an individual basis. And the recommendations from the task force were consistent with putting that responsibility in the hands of the case conference committee. It's essential that the committee, who knows them well, make those decisions without that threat of being penalized. Now, we already know that the Department of Education is responsible for monitoring these things. They've always been responsible through IDEA to monitor these things. But the way that it was put in the memo, we specifically voted on this information during the task force, and we voted against including this. All but one voted against this. So it was not part of the recommendations because it's not something that should be used in a threatening manner. And when you read the memo, it really sounded like, it's almost like saying, okay, we've decided a therapy dog is good for this school, but I'm only gonna let a couple of you interact with the dog and benefit from it. When lots of people could benefit from this. And when I say lots, again, I don't mean let's do text-to-speech for the masses. I did look at some numbers. I pulled some numbers from the Indiana IEP system, and there are quite a few of our 15.3% of kids who have disabilities and have an IEP. There is quite a percentage of them that get some form of read aloud. That is not read aloud for everything. There is only a minor percentage of those students who are actually getting the text-to-speech for the comprehension pieces. And again, it's those students who couldn't answer those because they can't read it in the first place for whatever reason. So how can I ever measure their comprehension if I can't get them access to what those words are? Once I read the words to them and the light bulbs go off, that tells us what we want to know. That tells us that this kid understands. And that's what we want to learn by these assessments. It's not, can you do it all by the book and do it in the same way that the kid next to you does it? It's what do I need to get access to that information so that I can show you what I know. I'll try to wrap this up. So, I really appreciate all your time. I know you guys are invested in outcomes for students and making sure that everyone has a fair chance. And that is what this task force really represented, was a group of people who want to do what's right for students, not to give them a leg up. I would disagree with what was presented before. There's not a lot of research out there that says that if I give you something that you don't need, that you're going to get an unfair advantage or that you're going to be disabled in some way. I listen to Audible every day when I walk. I don't like to read. I can read. I don't really like to read. So listening to Audible is something that gives me access to quality literature without having to read it. Teachers are not going to stop teaching reading, no matter what accommodation you use. We're still going to be looking at what those kids need and doing those things. But I just want to make sure that you understand that there is no clear research that I'm looking at, and I dug into this, that would say that if you say we gave you extra time and you didn't really need it, you're not going to benefit from it. You're still going to get accomplished what you need to get accomplished in your regular amount of time. If I read something to you and you could read it, it is not on that day that we take iLearn going to handicap you for the rest of the year because we read it to you. So that the fear of giving somebody something that they don't need, I think is way blown out of proportion. So again, thank you for supporting all students, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Cheryl Clemens.
Good morning.
Good morning. Hi, my name is Cheryl Clemens, and I'm one of the leaders of Decoding Dyslexia. Thank you for removing the this item from the consent agenda. My comments are joined with me by both the ARC of Indiana and iCase. They join us in expressing our concerns. We've worked for over 2 years to ensure that students have access to the read aloud accommodation on the reading comprehension portion of state testing, even while some states have had this accommodation in place since December of 2014. We're so encouraged by the collaborative discussion that occurred in the Indiana Standards and Assessment Accommodations Task Force meetings. However, we are so discouraged by this document and the seeming lack of understanding of disability and accommodations. We believe that this document is inconsistent with not only IDEA and Section 504, but also the Americans with Disabilities Act. The ADA has a broader definition of disability and seeks to ensure that students have access to the accommodations that students need to be successful, like screen readers. And yet the purpose of this document appears to be an attempt to deny students of accommodations. For example, According to this document, a student would be denied of his needed accommodation if the student lacks documentation with specific dates of interventions along with progress monitoring data. While we believe these students should be provided effective evidence-based interventions, the lack of documentation should not be a barrier to an accommodation they need to be successful. Additionally, a student who has not been provided this accommodation on formative assessments would likely not be eligible for this accommodation because current practice is to align the accommodation of the formative assessment to the state policy of denying the accommodation. Even more surprising is that the document denies students with other learning needs from accessing this accommodation. Thankfully, when it comes to accommodation, special education law places the emphasis on student need and not on disability class. Providing needed accommodations is not a matter of preference or policy, but a matter of law. In conclusion, to deny students of necessary accommodations has the potential not only to hinder effective and efficient learning, but also to violate the students' rights under IDEA, Section 504, and the ADA. This policy statement also opens districts up to litigation. Please consider tabling the guidance until the December meeting so that stakeholders can collaborate with the board and the IDOE on the document. The goal of a guidance should be to provide meaningful input to schools while ensuring the rights and needs of students with disabilities, and not to discourage the use of or limit access to certain accommodations. And thank you for the opportunity to share our concerns. Any questions?
Thank you.
So just a few things. I just want to be clear that this guidance does allow the screen reader for all grades. It allows it, but by law, the DOE is required to put out guidance and the board is required to approve it. And so that's what this is. I mean, but something has to be out there to inform parents and educators when is it appropriate and when is it not. And that's all this guidance does. With that,
Can we bring Michelle up?
Dr. Goff.
Good morning.
Good morning, members of the board, Superintendent Cormack. So thank you for the opportunity to discuss the guidance document that I prepared. I also believe that you all received a supporting memorandum of policy and law that was pretty comprehensive, related to the policy and legal research, as well as assessment and measurement field research. This guidance document in front of you began with a list of questions that were provided to Mr. Murphy from the Indiana Department of Education that were going to be the guidance. Because of the memorandum that I had supplied to the board and its discussion of guidance from other states who have addressed this situation, he asked that I look at it and provide any feedback. He had also asked that members of your technical advisory committee provide feedback on that document. The 4 members of the technical advisory committee who provided feedback on that document all expressed concerns that the simple list of questions with yes and no was not sufficiently indicative of the behavior or guiding decisions that a parent or member of the case conference committee or 504 team ought to make based on that response. Therefore, I looked to the guidance from South Dakota, Massachusetts, Ohio as a neighboring state, who all have guidance to this very issue, seeking to do what my understanding that this board seeks to do, as well as our recent speakers, balancing the appropriate accommodation, but also balancing the need to get valid measurement for students who do not have a disability that requires the accommodation. Thus, I left the initial list of questions from the Indiana Department of Education alone with minimal revisions and added a narrative description beneath each so that a member of the case conference committee, 504 team, or a parent or guardian would understand, after answering that question, how that question spoke to the appropriateness of a read aloud accommodation. The entire document can be connected to guidance from these other states, and I also remind it is grounded in the research and footnotes that are in the memorandum that you were provided. Under the special education law, IDEA, you are required to provide this type of guidance. IDEA was modified in 2015 and then finalized and slightly modified again in 2017. In that provision, we are required to not only provide guidance, but also public reporting around these accommodations. Comprehensive guidance has not been being provided, but we have good examples from these other states about how we can provide guidance that will allow the appropriate use of read aloud accommodations for students who have disabilities that require it, but not be overly broad about assigning that accommodation to students who do not require it. There is research in the memorandum that I provided that showed that when we provide read aloud accommodations for students who do not require it, it has been shown to actually lower their assessment score. Those of us who have been in the classroom or read a lot about this know that sometimes verbal read aloud is a little slower and a different mental process than those who can decode. So you do want to be purposeful and narrowly tailor the accommodation based upon the student's needed disability. I'm happy to take questions around the specific guidance or the overall content of the memorandum.
Any questions by board members? David?
Thanks for being here today. Thanks for writing it up and so forth. You clarified my first question, which deals with the process. And so what we heard today were some comments about what's not included, but it sounds like you considered their comments and decided to go in a different way, that they had the opportunity to provide input, but the department decided to go in a different direction. Is that correct?
Certainly. The guidance in front of you is based off of a document provided by the department. My understanding there has been collaboration with the department and members of the task force. I simply provided elaboration, guiding narrative, and that decision was based upon what appeared to be best practice from other states who are providing guidance under IDEA around this very accommodation.
Second question is more specific because special education is wrought with all kinds of legal issues, and it seems like we're always in court dealing with special ed, whether it be federal court or state court. So my next two questions deal specifically with that. We heard testimony that what is being proposed is inconsistent with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And if that is the case, then we are opening up the state to all kinds of litigation. What's your response to that? Is it consistent or inconsistent with ADA?
I believe this guidance is absolutely consistent. Indeed, it leaves the decision with the case conference committee as required under IDEA or the 504 team, depending on the student's situation. And it just provides guidance around making that decision. I did not, unlike others, I didn't provide much about my background because I know so many of you, but I will quickly note I am an attorney. I went to IU Bloomington, graduated Order of the Barristers. I have a PhD in education policy from IU Bloomington as well. And I hold an LLM from Georgetown University in international business and economic law. I have spent the bulk of my professional career working in education law, students with disabilities, and I have a number of publications. This is covered in the memorandum, but I certainly was applying the law as written under IDEA, as well as the policy and research that exists in this area.
My last question is also a legal question, and I'm raising these because I trust your judgment, but those out there who are listening to us raising the issues of potential legal litigation, I think it's an opportunity for you to speak publicly and clarify this based on your great background. There was testimony this morning that what we are probably about to adopt will create some ongoing litigation at the local level, that in local level schools applying what we will probably pass today may open them up to litigation. We can't prevent anyone from suing anyone else, obviously, but do you see any liability there from what we're going to pass and what you've written?
Again, the guidance document is just to help inform the case conference committee and 504 team process, so that when you're sitting at that table and making a decision per student around that individual student's needs, everyone is understanding the role of diagnostic data, the role of research, what it means about invalidating a score, how to interpret and apply diagnostic data and use that in making these individualized determinations. There is nothing in this guidance document that would suggest in any way, not to the letter of the law, complying with IDEA and Indiana's Article 7, as well as ADA under Section 504. I would believe that more information around these accommodations should facilitate better case conference committee and 504 team decisions.
Thanks for your insights and thanks for your good work on this document.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Michelle, isn't it at this point in time on iLearn, this accommodation is not available for students?
So my understanding based on the task force was it was not going to be available because they could not do human reader, but then there was discussion at the task force from Dr. Flores that they were going to do a text-to-speech allowance for the spring 21 administration. And therefore, for students who require a text-to-speech but not a human reader would indeed have the opportunity to benefit from the accommodation if needed.
I appreciate the fact you put into guidance that helps the case conference committee make those decisions, that we continue to give the students all the tools that they need so we can understand exactly where they're at academically and provide more assistance to them. So it's a very thorough document, and I thank you.
Any other questions?
I also appreciate the work that you put into the document. I do want everyone to consider, though, that the case conference committee is made up of individuals that, as was spoken earlier, that know the student very well. And as having been a member on multiple case conference committees and making those decisions, I do want to make sure that we are aware that providing accommodations for a student is not, it's not an easy thing to do. So typically when litigation happens, because that was brought up, it's because a student was afforded an accommodation in their IEP, but unfortunately was not provided that accommodation by the school. And typically that happens because it's difficult to provide accommodations sometimes. So as a member of a case conference committee, you sit down and you're sitting with the parent. You know, there's a public agency rep there. There's an instructional strategist, a general education teacher, special education teacher, and you're sitting with the student. And as a committee, you don't say, hey, what is it gonna take for you to pass this test? You say, what do you need to learn? What is it gonna take to help you learn? So if a student is saying, I'm really distracted when it's time for me to work independently, I'm struggling, I'm distracted, that triggers that case conference committee to say, maybe he needs sound, or she needs sound dampening headphones to help them, you know, when it's time for him or her to work independently. There are certain things that students say that we say, hey, now let's address this issue. And sometimes as a special educator, it's difficult to get general education teachers on board because it's extra work for them. So, you know, they have to remember, hey, Johnny needs this set of headphones when it's time for independent practice. If he is not given that accommodation, you're violating his IEP. So providing accommodations is not something that's just, let's just throw a bunch of them at students, because it's difficult. If a student needs guided notes because they're having trouble paying attention in class and being able to take adequate notes at the same time, it's difficult for a teacher to provide guided notes for that student, but it's something that we do because that's what the student needs. So I do hope there's confidence in case conference committees, because that confidence needs to be there, just like it's there when they make the decision to give a student a paraprofessional, or it's there when they decide whether a student should have additional time, or if it's time and a half or double time. We give these case conference committees that mandate to make the best decision for the student. And I think that this is another one of those mandates that they can handle. Case conference committees aren't in the business of abusing accommodations. And I just wanted to speak that piece.
Thank you. Any other questions by board members? I would say that I shared this guidance with certainly the folks in the EVSC and some surrounding districts, and this is folks that do the work we're talking about. They do the implementation of this work, and they appreciated the guidance and said that they were very, very, very supportive of it. Again, it's a very small sample size, I understand, but the folks that institute this work for us said that this work was rock solid, and they were impressed with it. So thank you for that.
Can I say something else again? I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
absolutely.
I'm not opposed to guidance. I do
I
want to
wasn't
say that.
thinking about that.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely. No.
I just want to make sure that the goal of the guidance isn't to limit students' access to the accommodation, but our goal shouldn't be to limit. It should be to make sure those that need it have it. And some of the wording in the document indicates that maybe the goal is to limit, and that's a concern.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Ms. Delissa,
No.
Mr. Gurra,
Yes.
Dr. Ernest,
No.
Dr. Freitas,
Yes.
Mr. Gastineau,
Yes.
Mr. Mapes,
Yes.
Superintendent McCormick,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Ms. Moe,
Yes.
Ms. Rensler, Mr. Watts.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Moving on to discussion, we have 2022-2023 CTE programs of study. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning, all. Let's see here. This is up here. Awesome. Brian, did you? So you guys don't have to look behind you. I'm turning these off. I have a short presentation. You all should have received last week in your board materials a memo that I prepared
Thank you, sir.
to give a little bit of background and context for what I'm going to talk about today. So, first and foremost, my name is PJ McGrew. I'm the Executive Director of the Governor's Workforce Cabinet, also serve as the Governor's Workforce Policy Advisor and the State CTE Director. As I mentioned in your packets, you should have this memo that kind of outlines some background on CTE in Indiana, changes that were made in 2019 to state policy when the CTE authority shifted to the Governor's Workforce Cabinet. Also changes to federal law that happened in 2018 that required us to take a deeper dive and look into how we were operating CTE in Indiana. So first and foremost, thanks everyone. I talked to BJ probably, I think, 2 months ago, kind of outlined the framework where we were going, and he thought it'd be great to come in and present to the board as to all the work that has been happening within the Office of CTE since that transitioned under the Workforce Cabinet about 1.5 years ago now. So as I mentioned, this Office of CTE was moved from the Department of Education to the Governor's Workforce Cabinet in July of 2019. It brought secondary and post-secondary CTE under one entity. Secondary CTE was at DOE, post-secondary CTE was at the Department of Workforce Development. Those two things didn't really talk together. So this really allowed us to integrate CTE at the secondary and post-secondary level and start to align our coursework and offerings to our other talent development efforts that we have in the state. And I like to think about workforce development, education, whether it's secondary or post-secondary, all under as one talent development system instead of, separate things. We included our state Perkins plan, which governs how we operate CTE in Indiana, in our state's workforce plan this year. That was approved by the governor's workforce cabinet in March, submitted to the federal government then in April, and then fully approved in October. 12 other states have Perkins authority outside of K-12. We happen to be one of 2 states that have it residing at the State Workforce Board. Back in 2018, when the Workforce Cabinet was first established, we were required by state legislation to begin to examine CTE. We put together a CTE action team, of which Byron was a part of, as well as Katie Moat. And we started really looking at what was happening within the CTE space, the outcomes that our CTE students were leaving high school with, how they were transitioning to post-secondary, whether that was matriculating to additional education or going straight to the workforce. That put together, I think a series of questions that we started asking ourselves as to, why CTE, high-quality CTE wasn't available for all students. Why didn't CTE in Indiana really give students the chance to master the same skill set, because it was being delivered drastically differently depending upon what school they were going to or whether or not they were participating at a career center? Why didn't our dual credits necessarily align to and lead to specific certificates and degrees? And why weren't more students earning stackable credentials before they graduate? We have a high number of students on the core academic side that are earning a statewide transfer gen ed core, which is your 30 academic content hours that in the high school space that will transition to post-secondary institution. We have very few students that are earning the same in the CTE space, which would be a technical certificate at Ivy Tech or a certificate of graduation at Vincennes. So that really led us, in looking at the federal law, putting together our state Perkins plan, to the development of the next level programs of study. This was a key strategy that we outlined within our Perkins plan and our state workforce plan. It meets Perkins requirements. It was approved by the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education underneath the U.S. Education Department, as I mentioned, in October. And we were recently recognized by Advanced CTE as a best practice and innovative strategy after they reviewed all 50 states' Perkins plans. So we were pretty excited about that. Our redesign criteria, we really began this work in December of 2018 after that CTE action team made their recommendations. We brought together, at that point in time, the Office of CTE was at the Department of Ed, so we brought together Department of Education, Department of Workforce Development, Commission for Higher Education, Ivy Tech, Vincennes, state board staff, as well as the governor's workforce cabinet, to really sit down and look at how could we redesign our CTE system in accordance with the new federal changes, and also to ensure that every student had a high quality experience while they were in high school. We wanted to make sure that pathways were aligned to middle and high skill occupations. We wanted to improve the quality and consistency of CTE programming across the state. We wanted to ensure, especially with graduation pathways and CTE concentrators being a part of grad pathways, that ensured that students were both more employable and more enrollable once they graduated as a CTE concentrator. We had to ensure that we met the 2 advanced course definition of the concentrator law that passed in 2018 at the federal level. We wanted to make sure that students could earn post-secondary credentials while they were in high school, and also expand opportunities for work-based learning participation as we see more and more schools and employers partnering together to offer apprenticeship type opportunities as well. Some advantages that we see in this model for students, it offers students a technical skills equivalent to the STGEC, as I mentioned. A CTE concentrator is comparable now for each pathway. If we look at how CTE concentrators are going to start being earned with the class of 2023, there's a vast difference. Because of the 2 advanced course definitions, some schools offer those courses for 2 credits a year, some schools offer those for 6. And so if students are using CTE concentrator as their graduation pathway, we're going to have some students that graduate with 4 credits worth of content, and some students graduate with 12. So this new program of study model ensures that all students have an opportunity to come out with CTE concentrator status that means the same thing. The content is the same, and we have that comparability for students as they graduate. The new Pathways Capstone course that is under development will also provide an opportunity for students to continue to complete additional post-secondary coursework for their TC or their CG at Ivy Tech or Vincennes, or they can customize that capstone to be able to participate in additional work-based learning or an entrepreneurship capstone. Each program of study also allows students to meet 3 different graduation pathway options. Most of our CTE courses have industry certifications embedded in them, so that's one. Obviously, they would be able to earn CTE concentrator status. They'd be able to meet the dual credit requirement as well if their school has that dual credit agreement with their local Ivy Tech. But moving forward, schools won't have to guess what dual credits those courses are aligned to or work through with Ivy Tech or Vincennes on that. All of the courses that we have designed now have been backwards designed from post-secondary to have that direct alignment with post-secondary. So no longer will we have a student that goes through advanced manufacturing in Fort Wayne earning 1 dual credit course at Ivy Tech, and a student in Evansville going through advanced manufacturing earning a different dual credit course at Ivy Tech. That will be similar across the state now. So that's good for both the students because we know we have a transient population, but it's also good for the schools as they transfer districts. They're going to know right where the student needs to pick up where they left off. Some advantages to the CTE system as a whole. We now have improved course offerings, flexibility for schools, but yet consistency because we know what those sequences of courses look like and the content that's embedded within those courses. We have that direct alignment between secondary and post-secondary CTE, and we have new career resources available. Embedded within that memo that I provided to the board was a link to our new career guide. So you should all have access to that. It outlines the advantages of CTE, walks counselors, students, and parents through descriptions of each career cluster, shows exit points, whether that's a high school diploma, a certificate, an associate degree, a bachelor's degree, of occupations and salaries and job openings throughout the state. And we've also put together specific pathway documents that show for this pathway, here are all the courses, here are all the dual credits that are aligned to those courses, here are the learning outcomes for those courses, and a brief description of all of those courses as well. So here, just thinking about CTE as more than just something that happens in the secondary space, thinking about CTE as really a trajectory starting with that career exploration in the middle school and early high school years, really grades 6 through 10. Can be really more about career preparation as they start to take advanced courses in 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade. More advanced career preparation, finishing out at grades 11 and 12, and then really getting into that career training then in the post-secondary space, whether that's going directly into work or entering into an apprenticeship program or continuing on at one of our post-secondary institutions. So, and this is one of the pages of our career guide that you all have access to. So the programs of study, it creates a 3-course, 6-credit concentrator sequence for each pathway. All of our level 1 courses right now are being offered for a credit range of 2 to 6 credits for the year. This just takes the full scope and sequence of that 6 credits and breaks it down into smaller courses that allows schools to be able to offer it a little easier to make sure that students are getting the full content that they should be receiving over that 6-credit sequence here. So every pathway will have a principles course, a concentrator A course, and a concentrator B course. And like I said, this really equals that level 1 course that's currently being offered for the full 3 credits per semester experience. So to date, we have redesigned 56 of 75 pathways, and this includes 12 new pathways that we've really worked with schools, post-secondary, and employers to make sure that we have those on the books. You might remember last legislative session, there was a requirement for us to look at and to design a pathway in the energy sector. We now have that. So that will be available starting next year as well. We have 53 pathways that are directly aligned to Ivy Tech or Vincennes. So the reasons why pathways might not be directly aligned to Ivy Tech and Vincennes is because a student may need to continue on at a 4-year institution to actually be able to move into employment within that pathway. So where that's not necessary, we have directly aligned to our associate degrees and then backward designed what those high school courses look like. And we haven't eliminated or phased out any pathways, we've just added 2 with the 12 new ones. So here's an example of some of the new pathways or improved pathways. Actually, they're all improved, but here's an example of some that have really been honed in on. I mentioned that energy technology pathway that we were required to look at from legislation last year. Civil construction, many of you may have seen that I think Hamilton Heights and Garrett High School are partnering with NDOT and DWD to do some civil construction work. You all just brought in at your October meeting, Heartland Career Center, who is doing the precision ag pathway right now. That has not been currently available. They're piloting that program, and now by opting into the 2022-2023 courses, they're going to be able to do that without fear of whether or not they're going to get full funding or having to submit non-standard course waivers and the like. So really our transition plan here is to make all the courses available for full implementation in the 22-23 school year. We're going to make the courses available for this school year to really expand out on that pilot. We have 12 schools right now that are piloting this redesign. We had 30 schools, or 56 schools that actually applied for a planning grant. We awarded 30 planning grants last year and then cut that down to 12 that we funded to be able to pilot this work this year. So schools are going to be able to opt in that expanded pilot now, and we're really excited about that. Really the announcement of this with schools and principals will really begin in a couple of weeks when we talk to at the Principals Association Fall Conference. And then we have regional implementation workshops that we're going to do at least one in every one of our 12 workforce regions. So we're really excited about that. We had an opportunity last week to bring in some principals with their counselors to kind of do a dry run of that implementation workshop. Steve, who's back here in the room, was able to attend. They gave us some really good feedback on things that we might need to tweak before we roll that out fully for those regional workshops. So we're really excited about that. We did a half day with them. The feedback that we received was really we need to do a full day. We need to do a half day kind of background, walking them through what this looks like. And then the next half of the day, make it optional for folks that want to sit down and we can really dive into their master scheduling and really map this work out if they want to opt in for next school year. So with that, I know that's a high level, quick overview of all this. I'm happy to ask any questions. My contact information is up there. Tony Harrell, my assistant director of CTE programs, has really been leading on a lot of this work, and so he's been in direct contact with a lot of our CTE directors and principals. So if you get any questions from folks when you go back home and talk about this, him or I can really answer any of those questions.
Any questions by board members? PJ, I do want to commend you. I know that you started on this about 18 months ago or a year ago.
Yeah, it's been about almost 2 years, December of 2018 when we really dove into this.
Awesome. And how far it's come in that time is a testament to the work that you've done. Bringing those folks to the table, the folks that are actually going to implement this work, and then laying this out 18 months in advance for folks to actually see, hey, this is what's coming. I know the schools right now, it's hectic.
Yep, I can imagine.
There's a lot going on. I mean, we're just trying to keep the doors open.
Yep.
So letting schools see this and know what's coming and allow to prepare for staffing, allow to prepare for what this course is going to look like, that is more appreciated than I think that you know.
Yep.
So as you do your
once we have the dates for the workshops, we'll send that to Brian. He can get to you guys if you want to attend and send folks from your schools. That'd be great.
Love that. And as you do those workshops, continue to listen. Would be my only advice there. I mean, the work that you guys have done together is really, really, really good. The fact that it's laid out for folks with 18 months notice, I don't know the schools have ever gotten that. So I think this sets a precedent. Pat and I were talking about this. I think this sets a precedent for the way things should be handled. We're going to roll these things out and let you see them and know what's coming. So it's not just something we drop on your desk and say, hey, figure this out for next school year. So thank you for that.
Well, thanks for the opportunity, guys. Have a great day.
Next, we have Draft ADF Accountability Framework. Ron, welcome, sir.
Thank you, BJ. Today's overview will be quick. We're not going to get into the details of the accountability framework during today's conversation because it was just released last week to the public, and we want to give folks a chance to digest that, read through it, think about it on their own without interference, kind of from staff. So we're really excited that that was released. A lot of work went into it, and want to make sure you all understand how the work is continuing to progress and how it relates to the official work of the board relative to the next steps related to accountability. So as you know, I've given this update a few times. This process has been over the past 6 months. We started with a small working group of diverse stakeholders, associations, advocates, to really define the core purpose and the values of accountability in the state of Indiana. That working group then transitioned into meetings with affinity groups. So each member of the working group was able to bring a group of their stakeholders together. For example, special education advocates. The ISTA was able to bring a group of their members together and further have discussions about those values and the purpose of accountability. Staff took all of that work internally over the past 2 months, have been conducting research, having calls with other experts in the field of school performance and accountability, all in an effort to produce the document that we released last week, the accountability framework. And I think it's very critical for everyone to understand what that framework is. We've said it a few times, and I want to reiterate it now that it's out in the public. This is a collection of research-based concepts and ideas that are informed by broad stakeholder input, as well as the work that has already been done in the state of Indiana, including Indiana's A through F accountability model, the ESSA plan, as well as the legislative accountability panel. This is not a recommendation for an accountability model. There are concepts in the framework that are not completely fleshed out. They are not ready to be implemented tomorrow. The framework is also most likely more broad than any final accountability model will ever be. So I want to make sure that that's very clear, that we are trying, as we've, Chairman Watts, you've mentioned in the past, trying to be transparent about this process. The point of releasing this framework is to spur conversation about these ideas, about the problems that are pointed out, and about the solutions that are presented in an effort to make sure that the next iteration of accountability is even more effective than what we currently have now. The structure of the framework, it's largely sectioned off into 3 sections. One is a general overview. We also look at K-8 specifically, and then 9-12 specifically. I would encourage folks as they review the framework to look at how the framework interacts across these sections, as well as the sections in isolation. I don't want people to think that we're thinking about this in silos, but just given the comfort level that folks have historically had with A through F accountability in the state of Indiana, it has traditionally been a K-8 model and a 9-12 model, but we do want folks to look at it across the entire spectrum, and that's really that CCR continuum that was brought up. And so, last few things are next steps. Next week, we plan to host a series of stakeholder panels. We will have a panel with parent and guardian members to have a discussion about the framework with questions that are tailored towards parents and guardians. We have an educator panel scheduled with, again, questions tailored towards educators. And then we are excited to partner with the Indiana Association of School Principals as a part of their annual conference to host a panel with their members as well. All of these dates will be posted on our website beginning next week, along with how to access them. They will be virtual meetings, so the panel discussions will be happening virtual, and there will be a live stream of those virtual conversations. In addition to the live stream, they will be recorded and available to the public afterwards if you're unavailable. So time for those, links to those will all be posted on the State Board of Education website.
Are you going to send those to us? Will you send us?
I can, yeah, you'll have all these dates, absolutely. And then finally, we've structured feedback a little bit here. As many of you all know, we have the general SBOE comments where anyone can submit public comment on anything. That is still an opportunity, and we welcome folks to send their comments that way. But we've also created surveys that kind of tailor folks into specific responses on things that we think we're trying to collect responses or feedback on, and then also has a general comments section. So I want to make sure it's very clear. We've created those surveys, but we're not limiting feedback. we're open to any and all comments. So if folks just want to shoot us an email at SBOE_comment@sboe.in.gov, they can do that, or they can go on to our website where the links to the survey, the feedback surveys are available. And finally, we will take that feedback and plan to present for discussion a final accountability framework, at which point we'll go through and do a little bit more of an explanation for the board as to what the information means, answer any questions that you all have. Depending on the amount of feedback we receive, we may not be able to get that turned around for the December meeting, but our goal is no later than January to have a final framework for you all. And again, I want to make sure it's very clear this framework is not binding. The point of this process was for staff to do the legwork so that when you all begin the official work of developing an administrative rule, you are starting with a solid foundation that you can trust is informed by broad stakeholder input. Not everyone may agree with the final framework, but at least you'll know that that legwork has been done to prepare you and equip you with the information you need to move forward. And that's all I have.
Any questions by board members? Dr. Paredes?
Ron, this is an opportunity to maybe look at different kinds of things rather than just keep repeating over and over and over again an accountability system that has the same basic values that we've had for the past 50 years, including all other states. I'm not picking on us in Indiana, but everyone's doing the same kind of thing. So I want to put something out there and ask for your maybe insight or your promise that you and staff will look at it and then get back to me or get back to the board. That is the notion that should we have an accountability for high-performing districts and a distinct and separate accountability system for low-performing districts? By that I mean we have a number of high-performing schools and school corporations that I really like to get out of the way of them. I'd like to launch them and unleash them from all kinds of state regulatory provisions and laws that we burden them with. And so I'd like to see an accountability systems that those districts who have proved themselves over, pick a number of years, 5 years, 10 years, we create an accountability system that honors them, celebrates them, and let them be more innovative. On the other hand, the historic low-performing districts, I think, need more intense accountability so that we can provide resources to them. And I think those are two separate accountability systems. And so I'd like you to come back to us at some point as a board to talk about the pros and cons of that. Why not have two different accountability systems? I don't know of any other state who has done that before, but I feel really comfortable with the majority of schools that they really do a great job. I'm not saying have no accountability system for them, but a ratcheted down accountability system where we're not in their business all the time, that we celebrate them and let them move on. On the other hand, the low-performing districts, we need to take probably a more aggressive accountability system so that we can help those districts. Any reaction to that or reaction by my fellow board members?
I'll say I'm certainly comfortable, and I think staff is certainly comfortable exploring that issue and bringing back to the board our findings, 100%. Both legally, policy, we'll look across kind of all the board and try to inform the response to that idea.
Okay.
I would struggle with that. I would struggle with that being in an urban school district, knowing the efforts that our teachers make and our administrators make and the amount of growth that we get with our kids who already come in disadvantaged. Some of those districts that are doing really well have much better socioeconomic communities than what I serve. I think our job should be to set an accountability that's across the board for everyone. And I think, and there's some things in here about the dashboard, that if a community wants to look at other things and report out to their community through a dashboard, and this was Byron's concept when we had the accountability panel, was you should be able to do that. But I think the state, as far as a policy, we should treat everybody the same. The state legislature have gotten to the point where the foundation dollars now are the same. It doesn't matter where the student lives. And we still struggle with the poverty index and trying to make certain some resources get there. And so if we go ahead and start thinking that we're not going to have same expectations for kids whether they live in poverty or whether they don't. I just think that would cause us a lot of problems.
Yeah, thanks for your input, and I'm sensitive to that, obviously. And I think we could massage each of the accountability systems, and I'm only looking at two, so that growth would play a bigger role potentially in those low-performing districts. But in any case, I just want to put it out there. I think we need to think out of the box. My second question deals with there's 50 states in this country, and there's some who historically have done really well with their accountability system and have really driven student achievement. And Massachusetts comes to mind. What are the top 2 or 3 states that you're looking at as a model to help us bring together our accountability system?
Really interesting question. I'm not sure I would say there are 2 or 3 states that are driving our analysis. I'm actually pretty familiar with Massachusetts' model, having spent 2 years working in education out there. What I would say is we are taking the input that we're getting from stakeholders here and then conducting research. And I'll give you a concrete example of how that has played out in this process. So we received a lot of input and feedback around the role of student performance, so proficiency, in our accountability model relative and related to the shifts in standards and assessments over the past 5 to 7 years. So in analyzing that concept, right, that group of feedback, we went out and looked at different states. That manifested itself in this idea of a performance index. Now, there are multiple states, Massachusetts being one, who uses that model. The research, we actually landed and spoke with researchers from the Fordham Institute, who have a long track record in this work and did a lot of work as ESSA was rolling out, and then subsequently analyzed other states. So Massachusetts used the performance index, as well as it's cited in the framework, Arkansas. And one of the concerns with the performance index, Dr. Freitas, is that as you shift away from proficiency, you lose that. And as you give bonus points for kids that are above, you potentially mask low performance. And so Arkansas really does an innovative concept where they only give bonus points in certain instances. I won't get into the details. So I think the answer to your question is there's not 1 or 2 states that are driving us, because I think all the states are unique. Massachusetts consistently scores high, but Massachusetts is also one of the wealthiest states in our republic. And so, what works in some places might not work in others. And I would say that the answer to your question is not really 1 or 2, but definitely that concept is driving our work.
Yeah, my comment deals with taking the best practices throughout the country, wherever they may be. And I applaud all the input we're getting from Indiana educators, and we should go through that process and we should weigh those heavily. However, there's a lot of good things happening throughout the country that I want to be sure people will talk about those and determine whether or not they're right for Indiana.
And if I could, I think it's interesting, one of the states that you're describing, I think historically has been Indiana. And I think that we're all committed to reestablishing Indiana on that national stage. So folks are looking to us as opposed to us looking across. And there's no problem. I think everyone should be sharing best practices no matter what. But I do think we have a goal of reestablishing Indiana as an education hotbed for the nation.
Great.
Ron, will you have a session for superintendents as well? I mean, I know the educator one, is that going to be a teacher one and then we're going to have a principal one? I know that'd add you another meeting, but I think if you'd work with Dr. Koopman and make certain that you hear the voice of the superintendents through this process would probably be good as well. Would you be okay with just a meeting with the association, or would you recommend a more public-facing meeting like we're doing the panels? I'd do one of those.
More public-facing?
Yeah.
Great. We'll absolutely get to work on that.
Okay.
Any other questions? Comments? Ron, I do, and I know I said this before, but applaud you for leading this work. In most cases, government brings an idea and then takes it to the stakeholders to listen to what they have to say about it. You brought stakeholders on the front side of this and had their input building what you said, and I'm going to steal this, write it down, I'm sorry, is a collection of ideas. That is what this is. This is a place for us to go to research almost. Yep. So commend you. I know this was a lot of work, and it's not fun work. I know you enjoy it, but I
Yeah,
don't
I'm a
know
nerd,
how many
so.
others do.
But no, it's blood, sweat, and tears. It's been terrible, please.
So job well done, and you've included so many people, and that's how you get buy-in. When you don't just hear folks, you actually listen to them.
Yep.
So, job well done.
Absolutely, and I would be remiss if I didn't, express thanks to all the folks who've been working with us, IASP, ISTA, Teach Plus, several other organizations, Indiana Association of Public School Superintendents, non-public schools, John Elsesser. So would be remiss if I didn't thank all those folks who have contributed mightily to this process. So thank them as well.
Okay, thank you. Anything else for the good of cause? Seeing nothing, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We stand adjourned.